Eamonn Fitzpatrick, it's pretty clear what the coalition research is picking up, that people believe the government might have had its eye off the ball, and you're hearing this message from Peter Dutton every day that the Prime Minister has been distracted, Eamonn.
Yeah, and that's his job, to be negative as much as possible. I mean, you look at the other things that occurred during that period, and actually there's been a lot of work done, whether it is the budget surplus, whether it is the employment white paper, very targeted measures to assist people dealing with cost of living, those sorts of things have been put into place. But, we understand where he's coming from. Ultimately, he's the leader of the opposition, so he needs to find a way in. I think there's no doubt that the voice has absolutely come out to the fore and actually triggered a fair bit of soul-searching among a lot of people. And there's no doubt that the government does need to provide reassurance, as it is, that its focus is on the economy also. Because, as David quite rightly says, it's what happens over the next 12 to 14 months, really, that will, starts to sway people either way. I have to say, inflation, it's been a very tricky ride, but I think overall there's been a little bit of, okay performance there. But Jim Chalmers, when you talk to Jim Chalmers, he is not a guy who is happy to rest on his laurels. He is someone who has that front and centre all the time, making sure that this economy is doing what it needs to do.
You look at the timing, Eamonn, of the voice, the referendum. It's been held, it's been lost, but the political, if you look at the glass half full in terms of the government's political prospects, it has been done in the first half of their term. So there is a long time, an eternity, before we face another election, before the government faces the polls.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's still a lot of work to do. But I think, as a first-term government, they've done a lot to get their agenda in place. Whether it is around things like, critical minerals, whether it is defence, national security, there's so many things that we could be talking about as well. And let's not forget, ultimately, the Prime Minister was elected to office on one of his promises, which was to do exactly that. And he had to honour his commitment. Had he not done so, I think that would have been, fairly damaging to him. So, but look, there's still a long way to go, and there's a big agenda that the government has to lock into place.
While there's a question, David Gazzard, as to how significant or how many lessons can be learned politically from the devastating result at the referendum, one thing that I certainly would say, David, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is that Peter Dutton has very much got his line and length as opposition leader. It's given him a bit of confidence leading that campaign. As opposition leader, it's not the easiest job in the world, but I think politically he's starting to get his line and length, if not already starting to chip away at the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Dutton, against a lot of advice and consistent with previous coalition governments and policies of coalition in both in opposition and in government, was never going to agree to a position where the voice was enshrined in the Constitution. So he was consistent with that. I think what Eamonn is ignoring here, and this is where Peter Dutton is going, obviously, the first 18 months of this 3-year cycle has been really consumed with the voice. And people sort of start to draw a bead on whether they think their leadership is in tune with their everyday concerns or out of tune. Well, the voice has crashed. You can have a view either way on that. But in terms of, priorities 1 to 10, which is cost of living, 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 it has been off the main game. The one thing that Dutton is setting up the next half of the cycle on is some of the other things that are in the Parliament at the moment, which are going to have an adverse impact on the cost of living. So you've got a huge IR agenda, which is going to drive up wages and increase inflationary pressures. So Peter Dutton is getting ready to attack Labor on one of its signature policies that it's been running through the Parliament now. The other is the cost of energy, which of course is front and centre in today's inflationary figures. So the two real signature policies that Labor is running with at the moment, IR and energy, are both potentially going to add to the cost of living, not take away from it. So the platform that Peter Dutton is setting now, and the distraction of the voice and and not focused on the main game of the cost of living could come home to roost for Albanese over the next 18 months or so.
David, Eamonn, appreciate it. Talk to you next week.